Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Let's Learn This Together, and today we're going to be tackling passing by value and passing by reference inside of GameMaker Studio 2 specifically, because this comes up all the time when you are creating your own functions and things might not be working exactly the way you think they should. So as a quick breakdown, passing by reference is when you actually alter or pass in the real value, or more specifically, the pointer to where that value is being stored at in the computer. So this means when that gets changed in the function, it gets changed back in wherever it's called from. So that variable, that object, that array, it actually changes. Whereas pass by value is you're passing a value into it, but then if it gets changed in that function call, only that function call's value gets altered. That argument that you passed in, the actual variable doesn't. Now, I consider these names to be fairly terrible. I still have a hard time sorting out which one is which. But in general, passing by reference is faster for your computer because it doesn't have to copy any data, it can actually access it directly. And because GameMaker Studio is built on C++, it has the ability to pass by reference some things, and then other things it passes by value. And I'm going to break down which ones it does for which, because when you are creating functions, sometimes you must return whatever you want to have changed and then assign that to that variable, and other times you don't have to. So let's break down which case that is for pretty much everything you'll need. So what I've got is a project that I've created, and you can download this from the description. And essentially we can press numbers 1 through 7 and it's going to do something. So to start off, I have a variable called myHealth set to 100, a struct, which is a lightweight object with one variable called myname set to Aaron, and then an array called mywins filled up with the numbers 1 through 5. Now the first key we can press is 1, which is going to change argument. So we're going to come down here and look at this. Here's the code for change argument. When we press it, we are changing the value of whatever we've passed in here and subtracting it by 1. So you can see that we have called change argument and we're passing in my health. So what that means is when I press 1, and this little box just shows us what number I pressed on the keyboard last. When I press 1, you might expect my health to actually change because down here, it looks like that's what it should be doing, but it doesn't. And that's because this is a pass by value. That means that value inside of here is now 99 because we subtracted 1 from it, but my health remains completely unchanged because my health points in memory to somewhere else than value is pointing to. So passing by value, you're passing essentially this variable's value, its data inside of it. So I'm passing in 100 to this function change argument, and then I alter 100, but I'm not altering my health. That's the key difference here. Passing by value is you're actually passing in whatever that variable holds. You're not passing in that variable address, like where in memory that's stored and that variable specifically. So you can't change that variable this way. It doesn't do anything. So let's look at return changed argument. That is our number 2. So you can see here that I have assigned my health to the whatever I'm getting back from this function. So in this case, I am assigning my health to whatever I've changed inside of here. So now if I press 2, it actually changes it to 99, which is what you would expect. And this is also why you must return values for primitives. And primitives are essentially everything that's not an object. So numbers, strings, floating points, booleans, those are all primitive data types. So primitive data types cannot be passed by reference. They can only be passed by value. So anytime you're messing with primitives, which is really a lot of the time, you must assign whatever is changed from there. Now, GameMaker allows you to not do that by changing a variable directly in the object that calls the script. Now, this is not an ideal situation, as you can even tell just by looking at the function down here. I have to know ahead of time the variable name that I want to change, and sometimes this is fine. There are cases where, especially when you create these functions inside of an object, which you can do now, there are times you're going to want to mess around with the variables in that object alone. You already know what they are. You just need to do some manipulation and figure out what to do with them. And that's okay. So if I press 3, it subtracts 1 from my health directly. I'm not passing in anything. It's not by reference. It's not by value. This is just going in directly to the variable called my health and altering it by 1. So sometimes this is fine. And this is something that GameMaker can do, which is pretty cool. And this is object-oriented programming here because this object is calling this function, and then all of the code in that function has access to everything in our object. So that's something that we can do here. Again, sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's just not because you can't actually pass in an argument there. So then let's go to the objects value, and this is very similar. It's just going to be slightly different. So if we come down here, and I go to change object, and I can pass in any object I want, and then I can access the properties of that object and change them. So if I press 4, this is going to subtract 1 from my health as well, because I can pass in a different object. It doesn't have to be test here. It can be anything, which is really helpful if you've got lots of enemies, lots of objects in your game, and you just need that object to do something like bounce or move or explode, then you can have that object do that, but it doesn't matter which object you pass in. You can pass in a specific instance, or you could do all of them, I suppose. But this is how you can change just one variable in an object through a function call. Then we get on to number 5, which is changing a struct. This is going to be very similar to an object, and that's because objects and structs, well, they're objects. They're not primitive data types. Remember, I was listing primitives like integers and strings and booleans, but objects and structs are not primitive data types. That means that you can actually pass them in like this. If I press 5, it changes my name, because the struct that I'm passing in here is being passed in by reference. So this variable struct is actually the reference to this variable, and anything I change will get changed permanently and forever. Then we move on to number 6, which is changing an array argument. Now, I saved this for last because arrays are kind of a special case. Arrays are not necessarily a primitive data type, but they're also not an object. And to go along with that, GameMaker actually allows you to do both ways of altering arrays. So if I press 6 right now, I'm trying to change the first value in this array to add 10 to it. But pressing 6 doesn't do anything. And that's because by default, when you do this, you're actually passing it by value. So if we wanted this to work, I would have to come in and return my array. And then if I come in here and I set my wins equal to this, and we run this again, 6 is now going to work properly. But that's the same kind of thing that we were doing before, where we actually had to return the value that we changed. And that's not exactly ideal. So what's really cool is we can actually pass by reference the array as well with a direct accessor. And we can do this with all of the data structures inside of GameMaker, like lists, maps, DS grids, etc. Each one of them has their own direct accessor. So here, the accessor for arrays is the @ symbol. So now when I press 7, it's actually going to subtract 10 from this, but I don't have to return this array. And when I'm in the code, all I'm doing is passing in that array. So this is great because it can save a lot of overhead, because what's actually happening in this one right here is this function is copying the entire array, changing it, and then returning it. That is a lot more work for GameMaker to do, and when it comes to very small values, it's not going to matter much, but when it comes to thousands or hundreds of thousands of entries that you need to alter or change or get information about, this can really start adding up. Directly accessing that array and modifying that value is much, much faster when it's done with pass by reference instead of pass by value. And that covers the fundamentals of what the difference is. Passing by reference and passing by value, you've probably been doing both of them for a very long time and you just didn't know the technical name for it. And maybe you had some struggles when you were trying to do one of these and it just wasn't working the way you wanted to. Or you found the same case with your arrays, or maybe your objects worked in a way that you didn't quite understand. Hopefully this clears it up. And if you want to see more content from me explaining things and teaching you game development, check out my website, letslearntogether.com, for my courses on game development, including my new book, Become a Game Developer in Just 30 Days, where you can go from novice to basically ready to make your own game by just doing an hour a day for 1 month. Check it out if you're interested. Links are below. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon if you want to go even further. And, as I like to say, keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later. A huge thank you to all of the awesome people who support me over on Patreon. Their names are on the screen now, and every dollar pledged helps me create more awesome content. You can support me for as little as $1 a month and get access to exclusive perks like my Discord server, your name in the credits, early access to my YouTube videos and courses, and more. Check it out at patreon.com/letslearnthistogether.com or find the link in the description below and become a patron today.